Customer service begins with having customers that are alive to use your product, or in some cases, passengers, perhaps. Unless you manufacture roller coasters or operate spooky houses or amusement parks, it's not a good idea to terrify your customers either. Again, in the case of Boeing passengers. So Boeing is a company that has users. I guess a pilot's a user. Has people that uh, travel in its product, even though its actual primary customer is the would be the airlines that purchase the product. But then you customers know that you have just a few major manufacturers of passenger aircraft in the world. You have Boeing, you have Airbus. There are companies like ATR that make smaller kind of commuter aircraft. You have Embraer out of Brazil, which makes some very nice aircraft as well. But Boeing has since this, they've had their 787, which has had a lot of trouble, and they've also had their 737 Max. But those airplanes and the incidents, especially with the 737 that has had now fatalities, indicate a larger problem with the company. I'm sure a lot of you all have seen in the news. For example, I'm reading here from the BBC. This was Quang Tran told the BBC his seatbelt saved him as his phone, socks, and shoes were ripped off by an uncontrolled decompression 16,000 feet above Portland. He is among 7 passengers to have filed a lawsuit against Boeing, Alaska Airlines, and Spirit Aerosystems. That was in a 737-9 MAX aircraft. That's their aircraft that has already design flaws have led to several fatalities. On the Boeing 787, this is from the Wall Street Journal. This article was updated last March 12th, which would have been, I believe, Tuesday. Brian Jocat was asleep, buckled into a window seat on a 3-hour LATAM Airlines flight to New Zealand when the plane suddenly dropped, jolting him awake. He looked up and saw a man to his right pinned to the roof and several other people seemingly flying around. You know in The Exorcist, when the girl flies from the bed and hits the ceiling, it's exactly that scene, he said. I was like, what the heck is this? And a Boeing whistleblower, it's almost like some stuff out of a spy movie or something like that. Uh, John Barnett, who was a Boeing employee, I think he had 30 years with the company, and reported that, look, the company is not adhering to quality standards and it has shabby production, both quality control and other flaws. And Boeing went after him for, even though his whistleblowing could save lives. He said that they failed test with their oxygen systems, and that can be deadly because, in a plane they give you the instructions and they say if the masks fall down in case of decompression, that's when the air pressure drops, to put your mask on right away, because you only have a few seconds before you get hypoxia and you basically can black out. So the test had failed, and so Barnett ends up dead while he's testifying against Boeing, he's testifying in the court cases. There's litigation going back and forth. Boeing went after him, then he sued Boeing as well. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, has vindicated his account, saying that yes, there were that Barnett's accusations against the company were right. Now he's ended up dead, so the coroner says it's a self-inflicted wound, but you can be the judge of that. Boeing's track record when it comes to honesty and these in matters of life and death is not very good. And it's sad. I remember when I was a kid, or not even a kid. I remember just kind of a couple decades ago, there used to be a saying that was, if I ain't Boeing, if it ain't Boeing, I ain't going. And it was kind of like a nationalistic thing, kind of people. Boeing has been an American icon, a company that the U.S. has been proud of, like a flagship company. Um, but Boeing has gone from being kind of a leader to that saying, if it ain't Boeing, I ain't going, has now kind of turned into, if it's Boeing, I ain't going. There's an undercover video of people, Boeing workers, saying that they would not fly on the planes that they're building because they've seen the shabby quality that goes into the aircraft, both in things with operations, that's to say factory procedures and the ways that the planes are put together and perhaps maintained, and also in the design, bad, faulty design. And we've seen that with the 737 MAX, which is when Boeing, to save cost rather than build a new aircraft, took their old and fairly reliable plane, the 737, that's been around for a long time. I think certainly since the 80s, I think maybe since the 70s. And rather than kind of build a new, updated, modern plane, decided to try to modernize that plane in a manner to not, where innovation and design leadership took a back seat to cost cutting and cost saving, so that they can come out and say, look, we've got a new plane. And they really were rehashing an old airframe. And so we've seen, if we want to look into what maybe has caused some of these problems, Boeing was doing well. They had a scandal back around 2000 and in the early 2000s when they were building, they were working on a tanker project, which was, a refueling plane that the Air Force uses to when you have fighter jets and other kind of planes as well. They have these big air tanker planes that can do aerial refueling, where you can fill up the fuel tanks of other aircraft in there, like fighter jets and other types of planes, even transports or bombers and things like that. And the CEO, Phil Condit, at the time, was run out of there. He had an affair with somebody with the government who was in not in charge of by herself, but was a key decision maker in this government bidding for this new tanker. They were flying an old platform, I think built on the 707, which is a very old plane, I think from certainly before I was born. It's a plane that was from the 60s, if not the 50s. And they're still flying those tankers now. So Boeing was competing for a contract to build the next generation of tankers. And Condit, the CEO at the time, was involved in an improper affair with somebody from the government. They both got in trouble because of that. But Condit had been promoted over Alan Mulally, who was the number 2 at Boeing. He was an engineer. He came up through the ranks. He was head of Boeing's commercial airlines division, which includes the airliners and things like that. So you have like the military stuff and the space stuff, and then you have the commercial airliners like the 747 and 787 and things like that. And so Mulally was passed over to be the next CEO of Boeing. So he left. Ford hired him just in time because Ford hired him. He came in, turned the company around, and it was great to see that Ford was the only American company that, after the 2008 meltdown, Ford was the only company that didn't take government welfare money. The bailout, there was an automotive bailout. General Motors, which became Government Motors in my book. Then you had Chrysler, which ended up kind of getting absorbed into the what is it, Fiat, and also with the auto union getting shares of that, but then getting bailed out by the government. Ford, under Mulally's leadership, was able to really turn around as a company, and so he showed that he knew what he was doing. He had both the technical chops, but he also had the vision and the strategy to do that. So Boeing, on the other hand, after Condit, so Boeing had merged with McDonnell Douglas. McDonnell Douglas was another storied brand that had gotten into trouble under its leadership. It was led by Harry Stonecipher, and um, they, even though they had previous success, I remember when I was a kid and kind of during the Cold War, this was back in the 70s, and I was really proud of the McDonnell Douglas F4 Phantom. I wanted to go into the um, the Air Force. I was kind of 50-50 because on one hand, I have kind of an independent streak. I don't like taking orders and things like that. But on the other hand, I was a good patriot and Cold Warrior at the time. And then, I wanted to fly at first the F4. I remember when I was a kid going to see the Thunderbirds, and the Thunderbirds, now they fly F-16s, but they used to fly F4s, F4 Phantoms back then. And then they came out with the F-15, which is an amazing aircraft. Um, and the F4, I could have told you back then as a kid, I could have told you what the thrust of the engines. It had General Electric engines. It was a twin engine plane. I could have told you the thrust that the plane had. I could have told you how much it weighed. I could have told you its altitude. I could have told you the published maximum speed, which probably isn't going to be the real maximum speed. And actually, with an airplane does not have one. It has what's called V&E, which is the never go past this speed, or you can damage or the plane can come apart. But that's different than saying how fast can the plane go, like in level flight. How fast can the plane go at altitude or at ground level? So there's not like one maximum speed of an airplane, like you would say this car can go 150 miles an hour or something like that. It's more complicated. But still, I could have told you all those specs. I could have told you all the ways in which the F4 Phantom, the McDonnell Douglas F4, was superior to the McGoyans and the Yakovlevs and the Sukhois that the bad guys had, that the communists had back then. And I remember, and so I was I've always been an aviation buff, but McDonnell Douglas had fallen upon hard times, and under Stonecipher's leadership, the company was coming apart. It was at the verge of insolvency, and Stonecipher convinced Boeing to merge with the sick company. Now, you would think that Boeing would buy McDonnell Douglas and absorb those assets, but you also see that a lot of times you'll see a smaller company buy a bigger company or merge, and they'll call it a merger of equals, even if it's not. You look at AOL, Time Warner, you look at even in the aviation industry, when U.S. Air bought American Airlines was bigger. U.S. Air, I remember when they used to be Allegheny Airlines, and they were a regional carrier out of Pittsburgh, and then they became U.S. Air, and they continued to grow. And even though, so U.S. Air bought American Airlines, but the new entity is called American Airlines because it was a stronger brand, especially internationally. And so the new airline's called American Airlines, but it really is U.S. Air buying American. But anyway, so Boeing and McDonnell Douglas merge, and Stonecipher ends up run out over his sex scandal, and then Stonecipher, who actually ends up having his own kind of sex scandal as well. But before we get to that, he kind of infiltrates the leadership of Boeing with these McDonnell Douglas people, not engineers who built damn good planes, but at that point mostly not. Well, you had the MD-80, you had these the Douglas aircraft, because that came out of McDonnell, and then the Douglas aircraft before. But in these recent times or whatever, so you had these people that financially mismanaged the company, now in position to take over Boeing because Condit's out. And so now when Stonecipher becomes the head of the company, he promotes his cronies and runs out kind of the old guard, if you will. So they start with the same kind of management practices that put McDonnell Douglas in such a bind, right? So Boeing, rather than being this kind of product innovator with amazing planes like the 747, 787 is a pretty fascinating plane as well. But and the 737 had been a great success throughout the, let's say, throughout the 80s, throughout the 90s. But again, it was all a matter of let's cut costs, let's please Wall Street analysts, let's please stock traders, and not focus on the innovation of the company. And if we look at, for example, what happened to General Electric, we saw the same thing under Jeff Immelt, where even Jack Welch was kind of controversial, and you could trace some of this to him. But really under Immelt with General Electric, they went from being a company, one of the largest companies on earth by market capitalization, to basically imploding as a company and getting delisted, getting taken off of the indexes like Standard & Poor's and things like that, because they collapsed the company, because they gutted it from within, chasing quarterly accolades, chasing where you have stock analysts who sit there and say, well, this stock is we expect it to outperform or something like that. Now, you have engineering, and then you have financial engineering. And obviously, I'm not an anti-finance person. My background, I spent a decade in securities and capital markets and in the stock market. I'm not an engineer. I'm a tech-minded person, I think. I'm always, I guess, tech forward. I always pay close attention to tech as a user of technology. But if you have a company and you're running a company to be a long-term successful growing company, then there are three ways that you can kind of have a great company, according to Michael Tracy of the who wrote the book, The Discipline of Market Leaders. Great business book. It's old now. It's probably more than 20 years old, but I still think it's relevant. And he talks about how a company can be either an operational, have operational excellence. So if you look at Walmart or FedEx, or you could say like maybe Ryanair in Europe, where they squeeze all the costs out of something and they try to operate at extreme efficiency. That's fine, depending upon what kind of business you're in. Then you have product innovators. You have companies like technology companies. You could say Intel in the past, even though they've run into trouble. You could say Apple in the past, even though I think that they may be losing that. Apple came out with all of these revolutionary new products that kind of created markets where no markets even existed, right? So they come out with a smartphone and really changed how we interact with each other's now. Their Mac did the same thing earlier on, even before I remember. I'm an old timer. I remember I learned how to program assembler language on an Apple 2 Plus or 2E, and that was a 6502 assembler language, and so that was the microprocessor that was used at the time. Now I've long since forgotten it. I don't pretend to be a programmer, but back then, and I was in high school even, I still have the book, the 6502 assembler language programming guide. But so a company can either be a great innovator and come out with superior products. It could be a product-led company. Sony used to do that. Sony used to come out with these kind of it was like they were the market leader in all of these different products that they made. But when you have to be good in the other two, but you've got to really be either you have to make great products. You have to be operationally excellent, like a FedEx or somebody that can run a super supply chain. Or the third one is you have to be either customer intimate. Now, you don't see this as much in the services industry. You do sometimes, like I have a tailor who makes me custom suits, and he knows me so well that you go in to get measured for your suit or whatever, and then you have to go back and they have to adjust it. He can make my suits. He knows me so well that when I go there for the second measurement, it's usually ready, because he has my dimensions in a little book that he keeps and things like that. And so he knows me. I can talk to him about, how I know his wife. Okay. He knows my wife. So that's customer intimacy. So, or you usually see that more in services industries. Like you might have like, I don't know, a law firm or something like that, where they know everything about your business, and you'll see sometimes in tech firms where they get so integrated with your business, sometimes the best outsourcing companies are customer intimate because they become an extension of the companies that they serve. But if you look at what was happening there, so if you come in and just cut costs, you can't run a product company unless you're copying, unless you're doing something mass market. You can't run a product. You can't say, let's say we're going to make something high tech like satellites or aircraft and just be a Me Too company. Okay, because you've got to really innovate, or you can't do that in the long term because you're going to get left behind. So when they came in there, so McDonnell Douglas was in trouble, and now they take the same attitude into Boeing, and the engineers lose, and the cost cutter and the let's say stock analyst types who say let's go and do stock buybacks and goose our stock price. That's when you go out there into the market and you buy your own stock. A company buys its own stock to reduce the amount of stock out there compared to their market capitalization so that the price per share goes up. Or you do things like pay extraordinary dividends. So what Boeing did is they go off and they sell off their own factories for their own product, and they turn around and take that money and say, okay, let's pay out dividends. And the problem is that now you've got to buy your core products that define you as a company from third parties that also then have to go and answer to their shareholders. And so if before they're part of you, and so they're producing something inside of your company, and then you're going to do internal cost accounting and things like that, but they don't need to create a profit internally because they're part of your own company. But now you spun them off, and so they have to create, that means they must sell the products that before you got just internally because you own them. Now you have to get those products at a profit, or they have to sell them to you at a profit, and then they have to turn around and then pay dividends to the outside shareholders. So of course it's going to cost you more. And now Boeing turns around and goes back to, so Boeing spins off their factory, Spirit Aerosystems. And there were some other spinoffs and things in divestitures as well. But now they turn around and go back to Spirit and say, you need to lower cost. Well, that doesn't make sense if you just spun them off. And now you say that they, standing on their own, can go and they need to go and produce returns for someone. Okay. And then you're going to come in there and say, all right, let's gut this company and say, and so they basically came in there and demanded that they lower cost even beyond the point to where it made any sense. So now Boeing is buying these parts from a company that is being squeezed so much that they can't make any acceptable products. So they start to get deficient products by, common sense tells you that this is what's going to happen. And also you don't spin off your core. You don't spin off what makes you you. Okay. So if you have, for example, Microsoft makes computer software. The people that make Microsoft Office or Microsoft Windows or Microsoft Azure, their cloud network, are Microsoft employees. They might spin off some kind of customer service, or they might spin off retail distribution or something like that, but not what their core is. Okay, but this is what Boeing did. Boeing got rid of or divested its core, which is manufacturing aircraft. Now they're getting parts, or they're getting aircraft. I mean, this stuff would be funny if lives weren't involved. Planes take off and the wheels fall off of the airplane. The doors, if you've ever been on a plane, I've seen this before. And you've got window, and all of a sudden you're sitting in a seat and there's no window. There's just kind of like a wall, an interior wall there. And then there's windows. You're like, how come I don't have a window? Well, what's going on is that's a plane that they've gotten where you can, planes come in different configurations. So you might have the same model aircraft, and you can say, well, I want more seats in it, or I want fewer seats, or I want to have first class section or business class section or whatever. And they can remodel the inside of those planes and reconfigure them for use. Or you might take all the seats out and make it a cargo plane. Then there's no windows, right? So what happens is that based on how many rows and how many seats you have to have so many emergency exit doors. Okay, so sometimes what they'll do is when they don't need to have that extra emergency exit, they'll put a plug. They'll basically create like a fake door that fits into the door hole in the fuselage, the body of the aircraft, and then they'll bolt this thing in there. So there's no door there. There's like this kind of door that doesn't open, if you will, and then on the inside they'll put a just a wall panel in there. So you're sitting there and you're like, how come I don't have a window? Okay. Uh, and what happened in this case is that this when this Boeing aircraft was built without that emergency exit door, because whatever configuration it originally had didn't need it, they had they put one of these fake doors in there, which normally is safe and is fine, and it sucks if you're a passenger because you can't see out the window, but it's not a safety problem. But it is a safety problem if you don't bolt the damn thing into the aircraft. Okay, so imagine somebody puts a door on your house and it doesn't have any hinges, and you go to open the door and the damn door falls off of the frame. That's an equivalent of what happened here. But now you're up in at 12,000, 16,000, 20,000 feet, and that create the inside of the plane is pressurized, so all of a sudden everything inside the plane gets sucked out. If you're in that plane and you don't have your seatbelts on, you get sucked out of the aircraft. We've got the case right here of the guy who was, what happened? His shoes came off and flew out the window. His shoes and his socks and his phone all get sucked off out of the airplane. And if he didn't have his seatbelt on, he would have been sucked out and would have been dead as well. Again, it sounds like something that you would see in a cartoon, but sadly this is real, and it's deadly. So anyway, Boeing's been in trouble since then. There's a good book out called Flying Blind by Peter Robeson. He was a Wall Street Journal investigative reporter, and it talks about it's like the 737 MAX and the fall of Boeing. And it really and the book is before all of this recent stuff. The book came out a few years ago when the 737 MAX first started killing people. We had that fatal crash in Ethiopia. We had another one in Asia. Then all the planes got grounded, and it was over a year or so before they were considered airworthy again. Boeing had to go and make some adjustments. But the book goes into, I read the book a couple years ago, and it goes into how Boeing just really, the culture changed. The culture changed from one of engineering to one of how can we play with the stock price, and cutting out costs in areas, in things like safety and in things like quality. We saw something similar. I talked about General Electric. You take Intel. Intel is a company that was founded by great engineers, Gordon Moore and Andy Grove, who was a Hungarian immigrant. There's a third one. I apologize to his family. I forget his name, but they were three primary founders of Intel. And they were smart and they were great engineers who had worked under Shockley before, who was one of the inventors of the transistor. One of the inventors. There were other ones. It was a team effort. But Intel was this great innovator when they started out making memory, and then the company pivoted, they had the strategic vision to pivot from memory to microprocessors. They were going to get put out of business if they stayed in memory and there's a lot of, this is all history about how Japanese companies were about to take over the memory market, which they did. And so Intel became known for microprocessors, which was, and they had all the success. And so when that first generation of engineers was gone, Andy Grove died, the company got taken over by the CFO. And a CFO in a company, you combine, he's in charge of both the accounting, the internal accounting and the books and of the company, but then also, and this is where a CFO is different than, let's say, a controller. He was, you're also in charge of the finances of the company, the outside finances, the company borrowing money, issuing bonds, investor relations, dealing with things like the company's securities. So the CFO has all of these things, everything from the treasury to the controller, who's the chief accountant, they all report up to the CFO in a large company. A small company is usually the same person. But when Intel got taken over by the CFO, who was not an engineer, who was not a product person. Now, you don't need to be an engineer. A lot of people do have that bias. Steve Jobs was not an engineer. Steve Jobs was a designer. He was a technical person who uh, was technical enough to be able to talk to his engineers and to talk to his programmers. He was not really a computer programmer in like that. He was like a star program who wrote the first version of the software, like you had in the case of like with Google founders, or something like that, or um, with Microsoft and the founders of the company. Bill Gates was a programmer who wrote software. Okay, now once the company got huge, of course he wasn't involved with that, but but Jobs, for example, was a product person. He was passionate about his products, and you had that at first with Intel, but then it got taken over by a non-product person, and Intel began to fall behind. Now they did do all these financial shenanigans, like they did things like pay the computer manufacturers to, like, so you had, just like Boeing does not sell directly to its consumers, Intel, for the most part, does not sell directly to its consumers. You can, if you're like a hobbyist or something like that, go and buy an Intel CPU, for example, if you're going to build a computer or something like that. But for the most part, Intel sells to their computer manufacturers like Dell or Asus or Compaq's now HP, Hewlett Packard, yeah, HP. Well, Hewlett Packard, that's a whole different story because now you have Hewlett Packard over here and HP over here, but that's a different story, and I'm going to talk about them soon too. But what happened was Intel was very smart in that they went out in the good old days when they knew what they were doing and branded themselves in the eyes of the consumer. So if you're old enough to remember the Intel Inside campaign, where Intel was able to get computer manufacturers to charge a premium for their computer to have Intel. So you had an AMD processor in a lot of computers, or you had an Intel processor, and the Intel processor usually costs more. Okay, but Intel at one point was technically superior. Then we remember when Intel had their math uh, coprocessor, their chip had errors in their either integer or floating point calculations. I forget which one, but you started to get these technical flaws and things like that. And Intel lost their competitive edge because they lost their product innovation. And other companies like AMD began to make technically superior products. Meanwhile, they had financial engineering types basically kind of cooking up fake numbers and doing things like trying to play around with the stock price instead of making superior products. The same thing that happened at Intel, again, it happened at Boeing, again, another company that does not sell directly to the consumer, but where the image in the eyes of the final consumer is important. So when you have a public that used to say, if it ain't Boeing, I ain't going, which used to be kind of a nationalistic slogan in the U.S., where we were proud of Boeing as this kind of American standard bearing of a company, it's become, if it's Boeing, I ain't going, where people really won't fly on them. There's a video out there where I mentioned where you see plant workers who say, I'm not going to fly on that thing. On the same planes that they're building, you have people who worked at Boeing who are saying, I won't fly on them. You have whistleblowers involved in litigation against Boeing for reporting on all of the errors that Boeing was making and refusing to fix, and would rather cover up than make quality aircraft. He turns up dead. Okay. So I think Boeing now is in a situation where we look at other, it's joining General Electric. It's joining Intel. Now, Intel went out and got an old executive. I don't mean he's old like he's an old man or anything like that, but he used to be at Intel, and then in the bad old times when things got really bad, he left and went to VMware, which makes virtualization software, which is kind of tricky to explain if you're not in that world. But basically, it's the software that's used in data centers, and it's part of the reasons why you kind of don't really see mainframes anymore. But now you see these data centers with like thousands of small computers that run and act like one big computer. It used to be you had a big computer somewhere, and then everybody had a terminal. But now you have a bunch of computers that can act like one big computer. So if you're using Google, for example, say you're using YouTube, okay, then it's not like there's one giant computer that has all the YouTube videos in it. Okay, there's a whole bunch of computers and there's a whole bunch of storage, and they're virtualized. That's to say that there's software that controls all of them so that they can act like one big computer. That's an oversimplification of what VMware does. But if you already know, then you don't need me to explain. And if you don't know, then that's a good enough explanation. So anyway, Intel's uh, one of their key people left to go run VMware, and Intel brought him back. And again, they needed to have a product person, an engineer in charge. And it doesn't necessarily need to be an engineer, but it needs to be someone who's passionate about products, someone who understands the product and cares about the product and wants to have a successful company by building great products. That obviously you need strategy. You need to know which product to build. So in aviation, for example, Airbus goes out and builds the A380. Turns out nobody wanted them. So you have to have strategy, of course, and things like that. But if you build and profitably sell great products, then you're going to have a great company, not going out there and just doing shenanigans like, hey, let's make the stock price higher by doing a stock buyback. Or, hey, let's just take this cash that we have that we could use to defend ourselves in a downturn or to buy other companies or to invest in research and development. Let's just kind of send it out to the shareholders. Well, that's going to make the shareholders happy in the short term. You're going to gut your company out inside. And that's exactly what happened to General Electric. That's exactly what's happened to Boeing. Intel, I haven't followed the pricing as carefully, but you have a company that lost its leadership when it comes to quality and innovation at the expense of financial shenanigans. Intel may be back on track. General Electric is too late. General Electric is now splitting into several different companies. They all have the GE brand, but they're not the same company. So there's GE Healthcare, General Electric Engines that makes aircraft engines. I think you have Electric Boat. I don't know if that's spun off or whatever happened to that. I think is that General Dynamics now anyway. But I could be wrong on that one. But you have their healthcare division. You have their engines division. They got rid of like when you see GE light bulbs, which is kind of what Thomas Edison, the founder of GE, invented. They got rid of that a long time ago. So you can buy GE light bulbs, but they're not made by General Electric. General Electric appliances, they sold that off. It says GE. I've got a GE dishwasher in there. But that hasn't been General Electric, the company, for a long time. It's a brand out there that somebody pays to license or so Haier, I think, which is a Chinese company, actually manufactures products under the General Electric brand, if I'm not mistaken. And so General Electric, like the old General Electric, this like global company, no longer exists. Okay, there are these other companies that used to be General Electric that are still around, and that some still use the name. Hopefully it's not too late for Boeing. First, they better get their house in order. They need to do, I think, a clean sweep and bring in people. Like they had the chance with Mulally to promote him, but like I said, he went over to Ford and did say Ford, and I'm glad to see that. Ford's another American icon, but maybe Boeing needs to go and get some people from Lockheed Martin. They know how to build aircraft. Or Northrop Grumman. They're still around. They know how to build aircraft. But tech companies must be driven by engineering excellence. You can have operational excellence and cost control running airlines. You don't really need to be innovative. You need to keep your costs down and keep your planes safe, of course. But that's driven by operations people, okay, like a mail network or like Federal Express or UPS or something like that. But to be successful, not through financial shenanigans, but by having quality products. So, I mentioned Apple. I don't know. Apple used to be a product innovator. I haven't seen any new products come along since Steve Jobs died. They have an operations guy in control. Tim Cook, I believe is his name. There's these goggles out now that everybody's making a lot of noise now. I'm kind of, maybe skeptical is too strong of a word, but I want to wait and see if these things are just a gimmick or if they're really some new revolutionary thing. They very well may be. However, at this point, I seem to think that there's some kind of gimmick. I don't know what the mass appeal is to them, unlike an iPhone or an Apple Watch or iTunes, what's it, iPod or something like that. So, but we'll see. Rather than build a new aircraft, Boeing jerry-rigged their 737 and didn't have good results to that. I think that if we look at what Boeing might need in Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, he talks about the difference between what he calls a peacetime CEO and a wartime CEO. A peacetime CEO, and he's not talking about literal, like you're at war, like the country's at war or something like that. But he's talking about a company in crisis and somebody to lead you through the crisis. And the things that make you good at one maybe can be detrimental in the other scenario. So you need somebody to come in as a strong and bold leader who's going to knock heads and clean house. I think that's what Boeing needs. Boeing, the board of directors has failed the company and failed the long-term shareholders who give a damn about the company by allowing this to happen. This is why a board of directors is so important, because you need to have people who are who are stewards of the long-term viability of a company and can replace the CEO and the CFO and people like that if they're taking the company in the wrong way. Sometimes when you have either the board who provides governance, if they're too beholden to the CEO, so if you have a strong CEO that kind of lords over the board, or if you have a board that doesn't have interest aligned with the long-term success of the company and the company's employees, you can get into this trouble. But in the hard thing about hard things, Ben Horowitz talks about where when a company's in trouble, you need the kind of CEO who can lead the company through that. And Calhoun, the head of Boeing right now, he seems like he's kind of like a deer in the headlight. He's not getting it done. The company has been in crisis now for the last 3 or 4 years. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. We don't see changes made. We don't see changes to the culture of the company. Boeing moved to they moved their headquarters from where their factory was in Seattle to Chicago. It was a dumb move. It was dumb at the time. It's dumb now. They did it to show that showed you that the culture was sick. That showed you that they didn't give a damn about the engineering. They didn't want to be close to the factories. They didn't want to see, the leadership was not interested in the manufacturing of aircraft, because they moved the headquarters to somewhere where they had no presence, to Chicago. Nothing against Chicago. I'm a Midwesterner myself, but that's not where the planes are made. There's no reason to do that other than, you bring in these CEOs from outside who don't want to live in Seattle or don't want to live in South Carolina or wherever the factories are, don't even want to be close to them. They want to be close to, I don't know, the opera or what's Chicago famous for? Steaks? I don't know. The Bulls used to be good back then. So that kind of shows you, okay, what was happening at the time. I remember seeing that move and kind of scratching my head saying, this is not a company that cares about its core business. And now we see that unless they get a change in leadership, unless they clean house and bring in people who care about the company and care about aviation and care about aircraft and care about leadership, then Boeing, I'm not optimistic for them. I hope they turn it around. There used to be a song back in the during the Carter administration, back in the late 70s. I remember there used to be a show called Dr. Demento. I used to watch when I was a little kid, probably about 10 years old. And the U.S. was in a recession at the time, and there was the Iran hostage crisis going on, and the Federal Reserve raised interest rates up to something like 18%. And the president, who seemed like a nice man, was just, kind of impotent to change any of this. And there was a song that kind of, the word was malaise. There was malaise throughout the country. I remember that being like the buzzword in the press. Even though I was a kid, I remember this. And there was a song that came on Dr. Demento, and it was something like, "We're praying for you, USA. We love you and hope you get better." And it was like this sad sack Eeyore kind of song, but it was a sign of the times. And I think one of the reasons that Reagan got elected is he kind of had this optimistic, shining city on a hill, I think he said in one of his campaign speeches, vision. He had a different vision where Jimmy Carter said, "Put on your sweater to, deal with the energy crisis." He was like, "No, let's beat the energy crisis." And so the same thing, I think that Boeing needs a change of um, of attitude, a change of, and that's not going to come until we have a change of leadership, a clean sweep of leadership. Go and find some people, like I said, from Northrop Grumman or from Lockheed Martin, and bring them in. And we're praying for you and hope you get better. It's sad to see what this American icon has done to itself. Has done, and they bought in a company that was rotten in McDonnell Douglas, and then they got infected by that same rot. It's like if you bring somebody who's sick, with COVID. Remember COVID? So somebody is, if you get too close to somebody with COVID, you can get it too. And that's exactly what's happened with Boeing, and it's a mess now. So customer service begins with customers who are alive to use your product, like I said, and we hope that Boeing will get back to making great aircraft. But right now, it is clear that they are not. It is clear that the company not only is failing, but has failed and seems to be recalcitrant about taking the steps necessary to turn itself around. That will start with cleaning house, get out the cause, because the things that have brought Boeing to this point are still there. The factors are still there. And so I'm not bullish on Boeing right now. I'm very bearish on Boeing, but I'll be watching to see if hopefully they can save themselves as a company, because we kind of need them around. But right now it's I don't see the cause for optimism. The company is a mess. As long as a Calhoun is there, he doesn't seem to be. He seems to be overwhelmed by all this, to be honest, and keep an eye on things. But I hope to one day have the confidence again uh, to fly on new Boeing aircraft. As somebody who loves aviation and and wants to see um, the company do well for its investors and for its employees and for the country, I hope to see that. But right now, Boeing, stop. It's kind of a love letter to you. I hope you get better, but you got to stop building planes that kill people and fall apart in the sky, like something out of a cartoon. It's really a shame. You've gone from an American icon to an American embarrassment. So make the changes that you need to make and get better soon.